We often learn early in life to use food as a coping strategy. In today's stressful, perfection-oriented world, the tendency to see food as both friend and enemy, a two-faced fixture that wields the power to reward, soothe, tempt, and haunt, can be amplified. While some people simply eat to live, others find themselves struggling daily to find a healthy relationship with food. And for those who were not raised in food-neutral families, the journey can be especially tough. When battles with food loom large in the psyche, mental and physical health can be negatively impacted. Can we heal the diet culture force by rethinking our relationship with food? Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I binge eat nearly every day. Ever since I was a preteen, I've struggled with being overweight. Even as a kid, my you gotta be perfect parents were constantly on me to lose weight. I'm considering semaglutide, but I know the weight would come back once I stopped using it because I think about food all the time. Could therapy help me? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Manly, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I am joined by a wonderful guest, Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, and certified fitness expert, who will be sharing her expertise on rethinking your relationship with food to heal your mind and live a healthy, diet-free life. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Supatra. It is such a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carla. I am very excited to be here with you.
So, before we launch into the meat of today's podcast, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you you?
Yes, well, I am, as far as I know, the only licensed psychologist who's also a registered dietitian and fitness expert. And these designations came through a series of steps in my life. I was always active and, outdoorsy. I grew up in Colorado. So I grew up in nature. I grew up loving food. I didn't have to ever worry about weight or shape as I was growing up, but did experience somebody very, very close to me who experienced an eating disorder. And at that time, I was so helpless to be able to do anything to, other than be a support to this person. And that planted a seed in me. And so when I went on to study in my undergraduate, I got a pre-medical biology bachelor's, not knowing exactly where I was going to go, not knowing it was medicine, not knowing it was psychology. I just kind of kept it open. And it wasn't until I was out in Los Angeles and became a Pilates instructor. And at that time had also experienced my own difficulties with weight gain in my late 20s and early 30s. That I really felt like, I want to help more people. I want to help my Pilates clients that are coming in with these difficulties, but I don't really have the skills for that. And that's when I decided to go get my master's in nutritional science and become a registered dietitian. And even in that, and working with people in that capacity, I felt like I still don't have enough to really treat how I want to treat. And that's why I decided to go on and study clinical psychology and basically have what I feel is the trifecta of, designations and certifications and degrees that would really help me reformulate people's relationship with themselves and their food through dietetics, through psychology, and through conscious exercise. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But, in doing that, it's helped me create the practice of my dreams and help me treat people in the holistic way that I want to treat them.
That is such a lovely background, and I love how each piece flowed, where one thing led to
Mhm.
another, and you were really leaning into what was calling to you.
Yes, yes. And it really wasn't until I started to practice Pilates and treat people. I mean, you don't necessarily treat them, but you help them. You help them recover from injury. You help them become stronger. And just the fact that I was helping was the spark that ignited everything. That feeling that came from seeing people heal from injury just motivated me to take the very long path that I took. And every day I do this, I am absolutely filled with gratitude, just
Mm.
knowing I'm helping somebody somehow.
It is a beautiful feeling, isn't it? It's so rewarding to
So
know that
rewarding.
people shift because of uplifting them, sending them on their way,
Yeah.
just maybe one slightly nudge in, better form. I have a question for you. When you were growing up in Colorado, I don't normally dive into, pasts for our expert, but could you tell me if your parents were they very food neutral? Was food charged
Mm,
in your
food
family
was
ever?
charged.
Uh-huh.
Food was charged in two really weird ways. My dad actually was the one who was more conscious about weight and shape, and he was the one that I saw dieting. And so that I personally just thought was weird at the time, because I'm like, why would you want? I mean, I didn't have a problem with that, so I was just look at that, with curiosity, and just see him. He was like on these older diets, like the Scarsdale diet was like the one I remember the most. Ate a lot of grapefruit, which is great. I love grapefruit. On the other end of the spectrum, my mom is Thai. So if you know anything about Asian moms, they are food obsessed, and they are very, they'll promote, you know, you have to clean everything on your plate. You've got to eat everything that was given to you. Oh, are you hungry? Do you need more food? So it was just like this bipolar environment, seeing, my dad struggling with weight, my mom, really promoting eating. It never really affected me, but it certainly did affect the person that I, mentioned having difficulty with eating. And it was so difficult to watch that, and left such an, indelible imprint in me, especially not having had the difficulties with food. It really wasn't. And so that, I would eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And I didn't have any thought to nutrition or what I was eating. I was just like, I was a voracious eater. And it really wasn't until I was in my 20s that I got it all. Like, I understood it. When I started to gain weight, and not that it was like, oh my God, this is the worst thing that ever happened, but it was really surprising to me. And it really started this whole snowball event where I was able to like see my clients extremely clearly. I was able to reflect back on my childhood, and really understand the struggle of my loved one. And then it just fueled the desire in me to go beyond what I was seeing as the narrative in diet culture. And certainly, just in the beginnings of my nutritional science education, still very steeped in diet culture. And yet I was still very questioning, like, how can this be the answer? Eat less, move more, which is essentially, what you kind of
Yes.
get as the base of your education. How can this be if everyone's eating less and moving more, but still gaining weight, or losing weight and gaining it back? And that's what really fueled this educational journey for me, in understanding completely and totally the body and its reaction to dieting. And I made it my mission. If we could stop dieting forever, wouldn't that be the most liberating, wonderful thing? Along with a lot of other things that are liberating, wonderful. But wouldn't it be lovely if we never had to diet again? If we actually learned how to tune into our body and listen to our body intently, which I don't think is taught very well or hardly, in a way that I think people really can grasp and then enact this change that will last forever. And so once I learned all of this, dietetics and then through psychology, and I started to practice with my clients, I was blown away with what I was teaching them and what I was seeing in terms of their progress, in terms of their ability to overcome their eating disorder or their disordered eating patterns. And on top of that, to see the joy in their
Yes.
faces when they
Yes.
realized that they could be free in what they were doing and how they were eating, as long as they were really tuning into themselves. So that's what prompted me to write the book.
Well, your book is absolutely lovely. Deprogram diet culture, and we will get into that step by step, especially as we use the listener's question as a focal point.
Yes,
Yet
yes.
before we do that, I do want to chime in and for our listeners to know how common this particular question is, how so
Oh,
many
yes.
people write in with questions like this, because often when we pause and look at generally it's the childhood environment where mom was really weight obsessed or overweight, or dad was really weight obsessed or overweight, and critical
Mm-hmm.
comments or mixed messages. And when people slow down to look at, was food simply there as a way to connect, as a way to sustain one's body in healthy ways? In most cases, not. And even if
Mm-hmm.
that was there, in many times, culture, the
Yes.
society around us, all of the messages about you must look like this person. You must
Mm-hmm.
look like that person. And I remember I just flashed on this memory. I was in ballet school when I was younger, and there was one girl, her name was Amanda. I still remember her name. And she had the perfect physique for a ballerina, prominent hip
Mm-hmm.
bones, flat
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, just this. And I was just this little kid with still roundedness. I remember thinking then, will I ever look like her? Because that's what a
Right.
ballerina is supposed to look like. And
Right.
no, my body will never look like Amanda's body because I'm not Amanda. But
Exactly.
I didn't understand that. And then growing up in a family where similar to yours, where dad was a bit on every, even though dad was fit, he was very militant about it. And
Mm-hmm.
mom of 12 kids, well, she was trying to feed everybody and soothe everybody. So of course,
Wow.
especially the women in the family learn to, especially my older sisters, learn to self-soothe by
Yes.
eating that. And that's
Yes.
such a common issue in
So common.
today's world. So let's dive into the listener's question, where this individual is feeling really stressed, it seems, because they
Absolutely.
are binge eating every day.
Mm-hmm.
They have been,
Mm-hmm.
in their words, I don't know the weight, overweight since, childhood. And then lots of parental messages about being this perfect individual. What do you,
Absolutely.
yeah, what's your take on this, just to begin with?
Oh, well, not knowing this person, but really kind of gleaning from all of these different aspects, and knowing what I know about weight stigma, that is the main driver for her behaviors, but also I'm assuming it's a her. I think it is. It could be a man.
It
Men
could be,
experience this as well.
yes, could be.
Yes, yes. Well, for the sake of this, we'll just label this person as a female. She's experiencing weight stigma from a lot of different areas from a
Mhm.
very young age. And I talk about this a lot in my book, that the two main biases that drive diet culture are lookism, which is the pursuit of this perfect thin ideal, and weightism, or fat phobia, or fat shaming is another terms for that. But I really think that weightism is the main driver of many of the negative behaviors, comments, and issues that we see with diet culture. And you can see this in this person's family. My, perfect parents trying to tell me I need to diet. When a person hears that, they're obviously being weight shamed. And especially when you're in your teenage years, that is so psychologically damaging. Now, they may have had really great intentions. They didn't want to see her be made fun of. They didn't want to see her go out into society and have to struggle. Yes, those are great, motivators to try to help your child. But the way that they were doing this created this level of shame in this person. And when we experience shame, especially when it comes from fat shaming, what you see is a vicious cycle. You see the person, receive these comments, feel shamed, feel terrible. And what they most often do, and this is found in many studies, is they will go and they will soothe themselves with food. Then they feel ashamed. Then they gain more weight. Then they get shamed some more. And it is just this perpetual shame cycle. And so, the difficult thing with binge eating is that oftentimes what we're binging on are the things that are, quote, forbidden, things that you're told not to eat. And that's a psychological issue. That we're told you can't eat this, carbs are bad, sugar is the devil. All the things that we actually really love to eat are off limits. And so when you have this kind of psychological battle, nope, I can't have that. I'm going to gain weight. I'm going to get fat. I'm going to be shamed by people. You actually start to crave those things even more. And so when you reach a level of stress, there's a certain point where it's like, all bets are off. Who cares? I'm going to go out and I'm going to binge on these things because I'll satisfy this and then I'll never eat them again. And then they go through the cycle again. They get weight shamed again. They feel terrible. They have a breaking point and the cycle continues. So I help this so often in my practice. And there's so many ways that you can actually start to address this and change this behavior for good. So I'm happy to start going into that if you'd like to.
Absolutely, because I agree with you. That shame cycle, whatever the addiction is, whether it's a food addiction, alcohol addiction, weed addiction, sex addiction, shopping addiction, work addiction, whatever the addiction is, yet food is a primary need. So unlike maybe alcohol, although, we're drawn to drink as human beings, even if it's not alcohol, but we find that those hand to mouth patterns are among the hardest to break because they come from early childhood, and there's so much hardwiring in the physiology because it's a behavior we've engaged in since bottle fed, little hands around the bottle, whatever's happening, little hands on mommy as you're nursing, whatever it is. So these are hardwired patterns, deeply, deeply embedded. And then we add all of the psychological baggage that comes over time. The messages we get, even when we don't realize we're getting the messages. We aren't realizing that dad might be saying to mom, oh, don't eat that, you're going to get fat, or saying to an older brother, oh, don't eat that, you're going to get fat, whatever's happening. Or the messages when you're watching a movie. Who is the guy or who's the gal that's most desired? It's the slim, trim, picture perfect one. So we're getting these messages from early childhood onward. And that's the piece when you talk about, you called it lookism? Is that what?
Lookism.
Lookism. Okay, so could you describe a little bit? We've talked a lot about the fat phobia and how that's a big driving force. What about the lookism?
Right. Well, that's the ideal. And that is the pursuit. Lookism is the pursuit of the thin ideal. And you mentioned, oh, you look in you look at movies and who is the girl that gets the handsome guy. And it's a narrative that's been played out forever. Alongside, usually there's some friend that's, her best friend who might be heavier, less good looking, doesn't get it, often kind of is derided or made fun of for their weight. So we consume this media. We also see this everywhere. We see it in social media, especially if you're not really curating your content and you start to see more and more kind of diet related messaging, and the algorithm then brings you more and more of this. You can become inundated with seeing this, thin ideal. And you have to be kind of wary when you're seeing this, because you don't know which images are doctored. You don't know what filters people are using, things like that. But if you see enough of it, and then you are comparing yourself to that thin ideal and seeing how you're not stacking up, that is what drives so many people into diet culture, along with, the other people who grew up overweight and have been, made fun of, derided, put down. They're also going to diet culture for the answer. And the answer, I think, over time has always been kind of the same. It is this eat less, move more mentality, but it's shifted and morphed over time, right? And actually, way back before the industrial age, the industrial revolution, being overweight was actually the ideal, because it meant that you had money. It meant that you had access to healthcare. It meant you had better food. And the people who were thin and emaciated were the ones who were out there working in the fields, didn't have money, didn't have food. And it really wasn't until food became, proliferated and available to all people, that then the wealthier people wanted a way to distinguish themselves from them. And so that's when they started to, in the Victorian age, with corsets and, really have this emphasis on, our weight and shape, the hourglass figure. Go into the 50s, and it was on like Donkey Kong after that. What do we need to look like? That's when movies, were really starting to become super popular. And you had these glamorous Hollywood starlets who were, this perfect ideal. And that's, just everyone got on board with that. And diets just shifted and changed over the years. Before, in the 50s, they were using a lot of medications, uppers and things like that to try to control their appetite, just not eating at all. And then you move into like the 70s and the 80s, and that's when sugar, oh no, really, I think it was fat first. Fat was the devil. And then everything became very sugary. And then sugar and carbs now are what is kind of considered the devil, what we're supposed to, completely eliminate from our diet. Then you look at also, and I think you mentioned this before, and I think it's really important to mention about food addiction or food noise. We hear a lot about food addiction and food noise. And yes, part of that can come from psychology, because many people will immediately go, if they're stressed, and think about the comfort foods that they had when they were young. And oftentimes comfort foods are, like contain more fat, have more carbohydrates, more sugar, things like that. And so there's this kind of nurturing comfort that a lot of people receive from that. But we also have to look at the food industry, which has been pretty insidious in terms of employing scientists to make foods hyper palatable and possibly even addicting. And there's still a lot of kind of debate out there about that. So if you look at binge eating in particular, you're most often stressed because you've been a victim of weight shaming or fat phobia. You have had probably some comfort that was derived from, higher fat foods when you're a child, maybe birthday parties, even though this listener's question said that the parents were very, kind of weight shaming with her. They may have also had a lot of messaging in with what they were trying to impart on her. And they would, give you a cake when you did really well, or, encourage you to finish all of your food, or whatever their mixed messaging creates all of this confusion and then creates this drive to eat more of this comfort food because also it is highly palatable and possibly addicting. And so that's, I think, a big driver of the binge eating cycle as well. So really delving into and understanding what our messaging was when we were young,
Mm-hmm.
how that made us, form certain beliefs about ourselves, oftentimes negative beliefs, and what did those beliefs create as emotions and feelings in you, and how did that drive your behavior? That's what I do with all of my clients that come in. We really go into that and go into even more detail, like what were their attachments to their parents? Did they have anxious attachment? Did they have avoidant attachment? All different attachment styles actually do lead to certain eating styles and behaviors, and it's really interesting stuff. So I help clients really understand this, and then really, especially their feelings and thoughts about themselves. I help them examine that very closely. And we really determine whether these thoughts are actually true. Are they substantiated by evidence? Are they actually, maybe formed out of one comment from one person long ago, or like you experienced with, your friend who was the, balletic ideal that sticks with you for a long time, and you think I should look like that, or I must achieve that. But when you really challenge these thoughts and you formulate thoughts that are not only healthier, truer, but also more self-compassionate and more empathetic, while you are also increasing your self-awareness. Your self-awareness is everything, in my opinion. We tend to, especially with dieting, ignore what our body's telling us,
Absolutely.
right?
And I'm going to jump in here because we have a lot on the plate for our listeners, no pun
Yes,
intended.
yes.
So, yes, let's recap some of this. Yes, historically, in certain cultures, food was definitely being overweight was a sign of being wealthy, of having plenty of
Mm-hmm.
food to eat in certain cultures in certain time periods, and definitely from 17, 1800s forward those who were able to relax and have a more sedentary way of life. Then they came to
Mm-hmm.
realize, how do we differentiate? How do we set ourselves above the other people, the people who are working every day? And that
Yes.
did come with more clothing that was beautiful and more jewels and, as you say, the
Mm-hmm.
whalebone corsets and all of the things that then lead us into, now we're in the 1900s, and what do we have? We have the print, we have
Mm-hmm.
magazines, we have newspapers. So now we have the spread, the beginning of this
Mm-hmm.
advertising that is
Yes.
showing the ideal man, the ideal woman, the ideal housewife. This is what she wears, this is how she looks. And it
Yeah.
has, from that time forward, thank you, printing press. It's done a lot of good. It's spread literacy around the world, but it has really, and photography, the advent of photography,
Mm-hmm.
we started being able to have the visuals. We weren't just comparing
Mm-hmm.
ourselves to our neighbors and our friends in the community around the bend. We were looking at images
Yes.
of the people that we wanted or may have wanted to look like and be. So now we're into the lookism. And I
Yes.
really like dismantling that because it is a huge influence. I know I'm not much of a purchaser of things, but being a yogi and a yoga instructor and all of that, I do get some yoga advertisements of yoga clothes. And I notice how even the ones that are body friendly, body
Mm-hmm.
neutral, who do they highlight? And there's one company in particular that very rarely highlights photographs of the average woman. They are by
Mm-hmm.
far the non-average, super fit, super thin, super muscular, all in one, perfect person. And most people don't dismantle it the way that I dismantle it and look at it and say, oh, that's too bad they're continuing to do that. Instead,
Yes.
people are looking at it and saying, oh, it's too bad I don't look like that. When it's a very
Exactly.
small portion of the population, no matter how much you
Yes.
starve yourself, no matter what medication you go on for the short term or the
Yes.
long term, like our listeners talking about, this person's looking at
Yes.
going on semaglutide, and research shows that when you go off, you're likely going to gain it back. So it's
Yes.
not changing your habits, it's changing your
Nope.
taste for food in the short term. We don't know the
Yes.
long-term effects of it, especially for people who aren't
Yes.
using it for diabetes. We
Yes.
so we are then again getting caught in the diet culture in a different way. It's
Yes. And it
medical,
scares me.
yes. So
Yes.
it's medicalized, so people think it's okay, but what about for the people who have underlying heart issues that are diagnosed or not diagnosed? All sorts
Mhm.
of things. So, we're not physicians, so we're not listeners. We are not saying take, don't take. We are saying be cautious, be curious,
Yes.
really look at
Yes.
research, talk to your medical practitioner, because often underneath, before you go to the quick fix of the medication, often the work you do underneath, which is the work you're talking about, where you're
Hmm.
looking at, in my fourth book, I talk about how our feelings, thoughts, mindset, energy leads to our actions. So when we realize
Right.
that interplay of five, of the feelings, the thoughts,
Hmm.
the mindset,
Yep.
the energy, the action, it sounds like you work from that paradigm as well. So let's
Absolutely.
take all of this beautiful groundwork you've set up and let's take it
Hmm.
to the listener's question using
Yes.
your book as much as you want to share to give our listeners some steps aside from buying your
Hmm.
book, which they can do and
Of course.
devour it in the most beautiful way.
Hmm.
What are some tips?
Well, there are, 7 steps that I outline in the book. And I think the most important thing that everybody listening, if you can just adapt and adopt as truth, because it is that dieting does not work. And there are biological and evolutionary reasons why dieting doesn't work. The body does not like to be in any kind of restriction or starvation. And if you look at most diets fall within around the 1,200 calorie a day round. That is not enough to fuel a toddler. So the body, when it's sensing, okay, whoa, we have much less food coming into our body, it starts to ramp up, your hunger hormone, like ghrelin. It starts to make sure that leptin levels don't, are not influenced so that you stay hungry as opposed to getting full. And it's recording, your body is recording how much fat, how much water, and how much muscle is being lost because it has plans to regain that in the same proportion it was lost when the diet started. So it is kind of a futile effort when you look at these highly restrictive diets. And on top of that, you also, there's a process in your body called thermogenesis, and it basically just means the burning off of your fat stores. When you diet, the body's like, oh, we're in a starvation period. And what it actually does is it suppresses thermogenesis. It's like, nope, no, 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 no. We're not burning up any fat because these juicy fat calories are going to keep us alive. And we want these. And, if you keep losing weight, yes, you might lose fat, you might lose muscle, you might lose water. But the moment you go off a diet, what happens is compensatory hyperphagia then sets in. And all that means is you eat a lot. And it's biological. It's like you cannot help it. And so I really want people to grasp that any diet is going to be futile. So then what is the answer then? If they're looking to stop, say, binge eating, what is the answer?
Okay,
And the first,
before you go to the answer, I want to dive in here for
yeah,
just a minute in case our listeners are saying, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. How could the diet culture possibly still be continuing? It's because for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years before the late 1700s, 1800s, where food was
Mhm.
plentiful and we started eating more for comfort than survival. Our bodies were designed to get us through famine. They're designed to
Totally,
do exactly what you were talking about. These aren't trick
totally.
words that Dr. Supatra is talking about. These are actual biological functions that are in
Mhm.
our systems to keep us alive. And we are
Mhm.
thinking, because we're so smart, we are thinking we can override them and go on this fancy diet, and it will change thousands and thousands of years of
Mhm.
biological imperative. So please
Yes.
continue.
Yes, and you see that that's actually the main driver, the financial driver behind diet culture, because we don't grasp this fact. And so we think, oh, it was my fault that this diet didn't work. So I'm going to go try that one, or I'm going to try this one. Or now we got these medications and now I can do this. Even with these medications, and this is specifically for this listener who wrote this question, the medications, and I don't want to disparage it for anyone who needs it to manage diabetes or any of the other health conditions that may require this medication. When people are using this as a weight loss method, it's really scary because you are putting your body into this starvation mode, but you don't really feel the effects of it. However, you do have such a reduced appetite that often many processes in your life are affected. If you're getting, I've heard people only getting 800 calories a day, we cannot run our brains on that. There is no way that our body can actually sustain that level of deprivation, even if the message isn't going to the brain. The body's like, oh Lord, no. Oh my gosh. I've heard of people fainting. I've heard of people having, just really amazingly horrible mental health status when they've been on this medication. Anxiety goes through the roof, depression goes through the roof. So it's so important to remember that even though this is touted as a quick fix and promoted as that fast way that you're going to get there, it's no different really, other than you're kind of tricking your mind. There's no difference from that to some highly restricted 800 to 1200 calorie diet, other than your mind is being kind of tricked. So if we can just accept the fact that dieting does not work in the long run, then we can learn all of the wonderful ways that we can then move out of diet culture and move toward a more natural and holistic way to be your healthiest self. And I say healthiest self because that's not the emphasis of my book is not on weight loss. It's about reformulating this relationship with yourself and food. Oftentimes, and with a lot of my clients, especially the ones who've come for binge eating, weight loss is a side effect. It is not the goal. Weight loss
Yes.
naturally happens when they start to become aware of their past. And that's like basically the second step in my book is really understanding where you came from. I talked about this a little bit before. What were your attachments? What were all of your, messaging? What were the influences that came to you that was your, childhood relationship with food? And keep in mind, before all of those messages, most children have a very natural style of eating. They eat when they're hungry, they stop when they're full, they eat what they don't eat what they don't like. It's not until this messaging comes in that they get confused and they stop listening to their body and they start to listen
Absolutely.
to everything else. Yes. So understanding that childhood food relationship and how that influences your present food relationship and really gaining awareness about this. Where did all of these ideas come from? Is the next step. Then I go into hunger and fullness versus emotional and mindless eating. Now, I think, especially in diet culture, we are encouraged to ignore our hunger. And like I said, in the education piece, When we ignore our hunger, that's when our body's like, no, stop, this is bad. No, no, no. And when we also eat mindlessly, or we eat emotionally, or we can also do both, that's when we're also messing around with our hunger and our fullness hormones. The key, and this has actually been, I think, for all of my clients, the magic light bulb moment for them, when they realized if they actually just honored their hunger and ate when they were hungry and ate in a way that they could
Yes.
monitor, meaning not mindlessly, not emotionally, if they're aware, and they stop when they're no longer hungry and they listen to their body as opposed to checking out. Most people, especially when they're eating emotionally, especially when they're eating mindlessly, they're checking out. I ask them, no, 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 check in, determine the difference. Because a lot of people say, okay, I know when I'm hungry because my tummy gets grumbly and I start to get lightheaded and I get hangry and all I can think about is food and I get a little weak. They know those physical symptoms. Emotional eating and mindless eating, two different things. Emotional eating, I had someone describe emotional hunger as a hunger in the heart. And that's when like sudden burst of emotion will just drive the person to eat.
Absolutely.
And it's
Yes.
usually, yeah, and it's usually negative emotion, although it can be positive. You know, we feast during the holidays and all of that stuff. So that can also, you know, be a form of emotional eating or comfort eating. And then we also eat mindlessly. Oftentimes, I think mindless eating is a product of negative emotions as well, and just kind of going on autopilot with what we're eating. Or we've done it the same way forever, or we're always eating in front of the TV, or we always have something, some device in front of us. And maybe the device is giving us like negative messaging, or we're just kind of like just mindlessly scrolling and you're not paying attention and you can just, you know, eat until you're way past scroll. So one of the most important things we can do is actually honor what our bodies are
What the
telling us.
body is saying. And I agree with you. And I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the most fun examples of that is going to the movie theater. If you're used to eating popcorn at the
Mm-hmm.
movie theater, we most
Yes.
of us know what it's like. You sit and well, it's not a movie if you don't have popcorn with salt and maybe butter if you like butter. And you can look down and go, oh, I can't believe I ate all of that because
Totally.
it's not, you don't even know if you were hungry or not. It was
Yes.
part of the experience. And all too often,
Mm-hmm.
that is what happens with overeating or even over drinking or binge eating. You're in a
Mm-hmm.
reactive space, not
Totally.
responding to that cue of the stomach. And I agree with you. If we learn to be mindful, and you had said much earlier that self-awareness is the ideal, that's what is so important. And I agree that that's why
Mm-hmm.
the journey of healthy eating can take time, because
Yes.
like any healthy
Absolutely.
habit that you're growing, it is about becoming self-aware, not
Yes.
judgmental, noticing when
Yes.
you're in that negative habit loop, not judging
Mm-hmm.
yourself or shaming yourself. It's about
Mm-hmm.
tuning into the body. And I think it's the Japanese who eat till they're two-thirds full, because it takes
Yes.
the stomach 30 minutes to tell us, for it to
Mm-hmm.
tell us, oh, I'm full. So if we learn to be really mindful, really
Mm-hmm.
intentional, it
Mm-hmm.
becomes the diet to lose weight. That kind of diet is doesn't have to be on our radar. It's more
Mm-hmm.
about having a healthy diet that
Mm-hmm.
allows us to have food when we're hungry, a little bit if we're getting edgy or whatever it is, and just be
Mm-hmm.
in that flow state with food where food becomes a
Exactly.
friend, not the enemy, not the controlling
Exactly.
force. Yeah.
And that's so funny that you just said that, because the next step is about being your own best friend as opposed to your worst enemy. That's where I really get into more of kind of cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to help people really examine their thoughts. I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but a lot of people have thought a thought so long, they call it an automatic thought or automatic thinking. They've thought it so long that they don't even register. It's just kind of this running loop in the background. And oftentimes people who have struggled with weight or shape or dieting, or maybe even have an eating disorder, they have very specific thoughts about themselves, and often they are very, very negative. Probably the most common thought that comes up with my clients is, I am worthless,
Mhm.
which is like heartbreaking to me, because I mean, there is not a person on earth that doesn't have worth. There's not a person on earth that isn't unique and special and incredible in their own way. And that's what I help people really, discover in themselves. So we do, some very traditional cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, such as figuring out, what are these thoughts? What do we come from when we look at our childhood? What are these thoughts? And let's actually break it down. What is the evidence that it's true? Lay it all out. Now, what's the evidence that it's false? And when we do that part, that's when there's a lot of light bulb moments as well, because they can really go down a list that actually disproves this thought so wholeheartedly. It's the actual process of examining it and comparing that they say, oh my God, I have this thought. I've had it for so long, and it's not true. I have so many people in my life who love me. I have so many friends. I'm valued at work. And they're just not thinking of it because they've thought this automatic thought so long. So I help them figure out, well, what's the actual truth on? And most times when you look at I am worthless, people actually come to I am worthwhile. I'm loved.
Absolutely. And it's so important, Dr. Supatra and listeners, when we become very granular, very mindful in looking at these thoughts, we realize
Yes,
that those links between I am, I binge ate, therefore I'm worthless. I am
yes,
overweight, therefore I'm worthless. I am not stick thin, therefore I am worthless. When we start looking at these thoughts and the feelings that are underneath them, the anxiety,
yes,
the sadness, the despair, all of those things that come up, when we start contrasting them with the truth, which is, as you were saying, that's what we start looking at. Our thoughts often lie to us, especially the
yes,
ones we learned in childhood that tell us that
yes.
we are not good or not lovable or not worthy, all of those things. And so much of that, we naturally try to wash down those thoughts, keep them down
Yes,
by
yes,
eating, and then we get back to where we began with that shame loop, that vicious, vicious cycle. So,
exactly.
Dr. Supatra, are there any, I know there's so much more, but I
There's
would
so much
like,
more.
there is so much more, but you've given us a beautiful taste of the journey toward really letting go of the diet culture, looking at it
Hmm.
in the face for what it is, a vast
Hmm.
money-making machine. Pharmaceutical
Yes.
companies are
Oh,
making, I mean, the stocks are off the charts. The
so
food
scary.
culture that is truly manufacturing food that has addictive qualities to it. They dial in just the right amount of fat, just the right amount of sugar, just the right amount of salt to keep people coming back for
Hmm.
more. And then people think they're broken. No, it's not
Yes.
you that's broken. It is a system. And we didn't even have a chance to talk about the whole food pyramid and how carbohydrates were touted because wheat was so plentiful, corn was so plentiful. So the food
Hmm.
pyramid that Americans were raised on, that eat,
Hmm.
this heavy base of carbs, it's it's not that any food is inherently good or bad. It's
Oh, yeah.
how we use it and how we have become so out of balance. So,
Yes.
as our expert, any last words on this topic that we could talk for many, many podcasts about?
Oh, absolutely. I would say that for that listener, if they can just examine objectively where they came from, what these influences were, and learn how to tap in and tune into their body, not only, to determine hunger and fullness, but also to eat mindfully, to embrace mindfulness, to examine their thoughts, to change their thoughts, and then create lasting behaviors that will change that for good, that is the way to permanently get out of the binge eating cycle. Going on medication, I think this listener is pretty accurate. If you go on, you may go on for some time to try to lose the weight, but then the weight will come back. And if you want a lasting solution that is also joyful,
Mhm.
that brings back the love of food, that also increases the love for yourself and appreciation of everything around you, there is another way. And if you read the book, you'll read the success stories from my clients. Their names and identifying characteristics have all been changed. But everyone that is featured in this book has been filled with renewed purpose and life, and have achieved this. Before they thought it was impossible to eat what they wanted when they wanted, and if they were on that trajectory, lose weight. When they realize that they can do this just by tuning into their body, that's what frees them. And I'm really hopeful that we can create a revolution that rejects diet culture, all of these industries, and actually help fuel new industries that are going to be beneficial for us. So I'm hoping everybody joins this revolution with me, because it's a really happy place.
Well, thank you so much. And I love how you highlight the joy aspect of it, because when we tune into
Mhm.
ourselves, when we become more self-aware, we can't help but become more joyful, because joy is inside of all of us, just waiting to get bigger and bigger. And before we go, I
Yes.
just want to emphasize two things for our listeners. A, remember, we are not dispensing medical advice. The research is out there, and you want to consult your medical practitioner, but there's plenty of research showing that semaglutide does do things like decrease muscle mass. So be wary, be
Mm-hmm.
mindful, listen to your doc, do the research.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece, and this goes back to Dr. Supatra's protocol, remember, patterns that are ingrained are hard to change. And as you work to create healthier patterns, be kind to yourself. Be patient with yourself. Get the support you deserve, because when your brain
Mm-hmm.
is wired a certain way from childhood forward or teen forward or 20s forward, it's going to take
Mm-hmm.
some patience to get healthy new habits. So
Mm-hmm.
celebrate those successes. Give yourself loads of kudos when you're, in that flow that feels good and you're tuning in. And when you have a hiccup, as you surely will, because we all have hiccups, just try and learn that lesson in a really kind, empathic way, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to get into that shame cycle. There's no upside.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
Dr. Supatra, where can our listeners find you?
Well, I am located in California, so if anyone wants to come and see me as a therapy client, and just to answer that last bit of your
Yes.
listener's question, yes, therapy can very much so help you. So I highly encourage you, wherever, what state you're in. I'm licensed in California, Colorado, Illinois, and soon to be New York. Um, you can find me there at drsupatratovar.com. That is my practice website. I also have my book, which just released on Monday, and it is available on Amazon. And I'm sure you'll probably put that into the show links, but it's called Deprogram Diet Culture: Rethink Your Relationship with Food, Heal Your Mind, and Live a Diet Free Life. I also have an online course with the same name that's a deeper dive into what you find in the book. And that can be found at a new-insight.com. On both websites, you can find all my little socials. Follow me, DM me, email me. I'm super friendly. I'm super open to hearing comments from anyone. So many ways to reach out to me.
Thank you so much. And licensed, I have to say, you are quite phenomenal. Licensed in 4 states, clinical psychologist. You are a registered dietitian, and you are a fitness expert. That is a lot, listeners. She has so many qualifications that, and an author. We can't miss the fact that you
Yay.
have written this amazing book to help so
Thank
many people
you.
around the world. So thanks again,
Yes.
Dr. Supatra, for being with us today. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Carly. I got to say, Carla, sorry, Dr. Carla, you are such a beautiful soul. I It just emanates off of you,
Oh,
and I just feel like you are just a person so full of love. It has been such a pleasure to sit with you today.
oh, thank you. And same back at you. I can feel all of your goodness through the computer screen. So thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for all that you bring. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.